against our will. Nor did we consent to living in a low-trust, multicultural society. I feel like every day fewer options for avoiding violence are available to us because the left continues to encroach ever further upon the things most central to our beings, to our nation, whether it be through force or subversion. I feel very strongly that our nation is ripe for civil war or a violent uprising. It is very, very important that we avoid this. I do hear quite frequently that we should just let this happen and that we can build something new from the ashes. But I can't get behind this because, as it always is in wartime, women will not be incurring the risk. And that will be about the only similarity that a present-day civil war in America will share with previous wars. The modern left is a more subversive version of communist enemies of the past. There will be no rules of engagement. We're talking about an enemy that finds offense based on emotional reaction, not actual content. We cannot expect them to adhere to conditional standards upon which force may be applied. They're completely unhinged, unprincipled, and this would not be like wars of the past. There would be armed militias on both sides, insurgency groups hitting strategic targets to achieve maximum casualty. It would be dirty, underhanded, and unpredictable. The left would be planting bombs in conservative dense areas, and they would continue to employ every Alinskyite tactic literally in the book. But I do know this: we will all be worse off if we allow the country to descend into violence. So I propose a better solution: separation. This is already happening naturally. I've just fled a leftist city filled with violent drug addicts and homeless people, and my new conservative state is seeing a massive influx of conservative Californians and Seattleites. People want to be around those that share similar values. They want to live in high-trust societies. Even if they don't realize why they're relocating, it's almost certainly because they seek this out. They may cite the superior schools, cleanliness, lower crime, lower cost of living, but really, those are just manifestations of communities with good values. I don't want to give up the coastal regions. They are some of the best areas of the country. But I do know one thing for sure: the left is incapable of effective governance. They have a religious devotion to multiculturalism and the welfare state. Both are unsustainable forces that destroy social cohesion. Furthermore, we cannot drive leftists out of liberal cities without violence. So I propose this: we continue to flee these areas and retreat to red regions. We circle the wagons and shame liberals out of our communities like they have done to us in the cities. We continue to develop high-trust, cohesive towns that span the middle of the country. We live happy, fulfilled lives where we engage in commerce with one another, give our children classical educations, and leave our doors unlocked. All the while, we wait. We wait for the inevitable collapse of leftist-run regions. We wait until they need us to recover. Then we offer our help, but only under the condition that we can reclaim these areas, that we dominate the government there, and that we remove illegal immigrants and uphold border integrity. As far as creating two or more separate countries, I don't see that as a feasible or realistic solution. The separation of which I speak will be cultural and physical and is already happening, but will not exist legally. That would leave us vulnerable to foreign intervention. You may ask, rightfully, why should we have to leave these areas? And what about all of the jobs in these cities? I know this is unfair and it's not ideal, but when a takeover is not possible without violence and we're getting pushed out of these areas anyway, it is the only option. Further, you will be happier. Moving to a conservative community will drastically improve your life. In terms of jobs, we should not be giving corporations our labor, our skill set.
That is alt-right YouTuber Blonde in the Belly of the Beast. She co-hosts a podcast with YouTube's most boring fascist, Matt Christensen. Her positions here, there are a lot of layers of kooky to what she's presenting here. Like, there's a lot of course, the usual cognitive dissonance, but also there are a lot of really deep sort of contraindicative tactics here in terms of what she wants to achieve, what the meaning of words are, because she's proposing ostensibly voluntary racial segregation because she keeps hammering that nail of high trust societies. High trust societies are the favorite talking point of segregationists and separatists, white segregationists, white separatists, because there are a handful of studies that said that racially homogenous societies are more the high trust of, like, the people leave their doors open. The problem with looking at those studies and making these essentialist conclusions is we don't know why, because it's the implication of those studies is that everyone would be happier if they just embraced soft racism, right? That everyone is predisposed to a soft form of racism where you don't hate the other group, you just trust your own group more. Studies need context, and we don't know if the high trust in these societies is a byproduct of cultural attitudes about what race means. This idea that race has always been this fixed idea, and what constitutes an inside and outside group has evolved over time. Race and ethnicity are not the same thing, especially in monoracial cultures. If you ask African communities about black people, they'll laugh you out of the room. If you ask people in China about, Asians, they'll look at you and go, "What the fuck is an Asian?" You know what I mean? Americans have such a weird sense that the divisions that exist in Western countries, whether they're racial subdivisions or ethnic subdivisions, are universal and printed into human DNA, when they're mostly circumstantial. The idea of who constitutes an in-group and out-group is circumstantial and can be made around various lines. And like I said, there are monoracial societies that would deem people of the same color who are of different ethnicities to not be worthy of trust. So racial segregation, which is because you can't have ethnic segregation in the United States of America. There would be 100 different ethno-states. When white nationalists talk about these high trust societies, they're talking about returning to racial segregation, even if it's just them voluntarily opting to move to predominantly white communities. They mean racial states. So you see how she touches on the whole thing about, I don't want to give up the coastal cities, so let's just wait for, this quasi-accelerationist argument of let's just wait for let's just withdraw our mighty white governance out of the coastal cities, and then let the liberals and the coloreds destroy their own infrastructure via incompetence, because people of color can't govern the coastal cities for very long because we're like children. This is an old talking point about white men and women being, and particularly white men is her intention here, white men being born leaders. And if white men withdraw their governance at these countries, and what's funny, because the opposite is really true. These smaller traditional societies with brown and black people in them are ruling themselves and just fine. The malignancy comes when the white man shows up, and the white man teaches hate, and the white man teaches greed to these more equitable, supposedly primitive societies. So the white man brings the hatred with him. You know what I mean? He creates otherization and exploitation that he brings with him. So by all means, pack up your shit and go, because we can only, and I don't mean all white people, I mean white nationalists. You can pack up your shit and leave. The majority of American white people are not white nationalists. The majority of American white people are ostensibly liberal, including dumb, boomer, conservative Republicans. They are bigots, but they are bigots in the, again, there's no negligible form of bigotry, meaning, but they don't want a deportation of American citizens who are Latino and black. They don't want the kind of extreme position. Again, they're soft bigots, right? They're small b bigots. It's not harmless and it's not negligible, but these white nationalists are under the impression that everyone who is white, and again, the predominance of white people in this country are not extreme reactionaries. There are problems with the white community oppressing other groups, but they are not segregationists. They are not, if you're talking about sheer numbers and you throw electoral colleges that give these flyover states a disproportionate representation, and you just did a straight up Democratic vote of by numbers of just letting white people vote for whether or not they want to restore racial segregation, I would say even conservative Americans wouldn't want to reinstitute legal segregation. I think it's been too long for that. But if you let all white people vote with no kind of anti-democratic buffers, the average white person would not push for this kind of creating legalized segregation. So, for me, the idea of nationalism is a problem, and I think that we need to start breaking down this idea of nationalism and countries. And it's already been done to us for the sake of capitalism. I'm not talking about corporate global corporate capitalism, destroying nations for the to liberalize trade and stuff like that. I don't mean like that. I mean transforming how we are internationally collectivized as a global community in a constructive sense, not in a destructive sense. That's the important guiding position to internationalism. Left-wing internationalism, which I subscribe to. I think everyone on Earth is a comrade, and particularly we need internationalism amongst oppressed people. Nationalism, even forms of left-wing nationalism, aren't going to help when we are confronting a global corporate threat. We are underneath global governance, and not in the Alex Jones sense, but we are under the IMF and all that stuff, pressing down on particularly marginalized groups and exploiting us for profit. But this person, Blonde, talking about how she wants to, how she's already, her life has been, look, if you want to take your ass to a small town or whatever, because you want to live around white people, whatever. Like, it's your personal agency at play here. I don't care about why you do it. My concern is when you start kind of creating plans and campaigns to, we don't want people of color moving into this town, and we don't want foreigners moving. It's when you start to compromise other people's personal agency that I start to have a problem with this stuff. It's so weird that fucking these right-wing reactionaries can't have anything unless they take something away from you. They can't have something unless they take away your right to bodily autonomy by compromising abortion. They have to take away your right to hormonal birth control, and who knows if they go so fucking nuts with their policy that with this because she's talking about the Kavanaugh confirmation stuff. It's pretty much confirmed that Kavanaugh is going to come up and fuck with hormonal birth control. Because that's Griswold versus Connecticut, right? Like that's a way to get women to breed more, which is stupid because, look, man, the reason that a lot of women take birth control has nothing to do with babies. It has to do with like basic, these conservatives are so stupid. They project this idea that this is just, the pill ruined everything, you guys. That's why promiscuity happened. They have this narrative about the 60s transforming the culture. There are a lot of women that, just to maintain basic quality of life, need hormonal birth control. So, of course, I endorse birth control for its primary purpose, but also you need to remember that fucking with birth control, in that sense, is going to compromise the health of people. Same thing with abortion. Abortion is not always about the thing that they're bitching about, which is like, these people want to avoid responsibility. Abortion needs to exist sometimes to save people's lives. Abortion needs to exist sometimes because your dad raped you and you don't want to give birth to your own brother. That's got nothing to do with their talking about we need to undo sexual liberation. Man, that's the least of that's the least of the implication of abortion. So they're going to come at abortion post Kavanaugh because they have the numbers now. They're going to come at because Beast was talking about Blonde in the Bell of the Beast talking about Kavanaugh. They're going to come at birth control pills, but maybe they go so nuts that they're like, no, it's unchristian to use condoms. Well, that's a public health crisis of monumental. Look, once these reactionaries start going with this stuff, you never know where they're going to go. They're going to go all the way. They're going to possibly go into condoms, and man, if you don't have fucking condoms, your society's done. This society, and again, no amount of celibacy is, because again, it's not natural. There's no amount of celibacy culture that's going to stop HIV, AIDS, gonorrhea, syphilis from tearing this society to pieces if we don't have basic contraception. So, I just don't understand, number one, why they always need to get their liberty always has to do with taking some kind of agency away from you. And then, two, they always, and again, this is their perfect contradiction. They always feel oppressed by something that they're not being forced to do. So they feel oppressed by race mixing, even though nobody's forcing them to do it. They feel oppressed by, recreational drug use. No one's forcing them to do drugs. They feel oppressed by gay marriage. No one's forcing them into a gay marriage. They feel oppressed by abortion. Abortions aren't compulsory, but somehow you're being oppressed by other people being able to do this stuff. I mean, again, this doesn't even... It's not even confined to the authoritarian right, because the libertarian right feels oppressed when when people are allowed to join unions. They talk about how that's being imposed on them. Somehow you choosing to join a union is being imposed upon them, and that's why you cannot reason with these people. All you can do is defeat them.